I feel, as you already know, that we are really dealing with a very significant, not only piece of literature, but really a very significant myth of the last couple of centuries there. And to try to relate to it and to possibly interpret at least certain parts of it, I think is a good and profitable endeavor. Now we sort of introduced the subject with the talking a little about Middle Earth and about the four races, as they call them, and I'm sure this has been now turned on Professor Tolkien, because there has been even a campaign against him, against his writings in Oxford, in his school. And I'm sure this was that he dared to use the word race. Well, I'm going to use the word race, and I'm going to say it if it has good horses in it, I'm going to see it, because I come from a horse racing and horse raising family. But in any event, that people can be so stupid, of course it caused the resignation of some long-time members of the Tolkien Society in Oxford, including my cousin Charles Coulomb, who resigned from everything. He says, people who are so stupid don't belong to Oxford, and then he doesn't belong to Oxford either. In any event, if we desire to exorcise stupidity from this world, we'll have to apply to a very, very skilled exorcist, because it's all over the place. It's all over the place. Anybody here, we are so small in number, anybody here speak German? Well, then I'll just forget it right now, because I revised the old German anthem, which was, I think, still used on and off on the Hitler, which is Deutschland, Deutschland über alles. I revised it to Dummheit, Dummheit über alles. Stupidity, stupidity over everything. And that's really the anthem of the universe, or at least, or at least of this world. However, while that is all quite stimulating, we have to sort of move on from there. As we already talked about Tolkien, some of the introductory issues last time, and this time we'll continue. We mentioned, and I need to mention that again, that of course the work, the 3-volume work, even if added with the introductory volume, The Hobbit, has been called fantasy literature, and of course that's in most people's mind that it is a put down. To me it isn't, because I always felt, and I think it's true of a lot of people if they would admit it, that our fantasy and our capacity for fantasy is usually much more interesting than, I would say about 500 books that are in print at that time. So fantasy is a very important issue, but if I get to talking about that, then we'll never get around to the Lord of the Rings. So I won't go any further, but let's say through the fantasy, through the imagination, we can bring into our lives themes, stories, myths, which would very much redound to our benefit. If we exclude them because we say that is fantasy, well, then we usually have excluded something very valuable that would have redounded to our benefit. I remember once, I think some fundamentalist Christian whom, like other people, I like to annoy them a little, you know. It's a particular joy to do that. In any event, you know, something of this sort. Hoeller said about some piece of it, Hoeller, that's not true. And I said, you know what, lady, if you read the scholars, your Bible is not true either. Because it's not meant to be true. But of course they don't understand that, you know. Well, I think that's enough flagellating of fundamentalists and things of that sort, so we might as well move on. Now, I mentioned that the setting of all three of the trilogy, as well as, of course, of the introductory volume, The Hobbit, are in a fantasy country or a fantasy continent, it would probably rather be, and there are maps and all sorts of things of that sort in the books, which is an alternative reality, an alternative world. I spoke of that. Then we have, of course, the introductory volume, The Hobbit, which I think only, I may be mistaken here, I think it may have only come out in the paperback, but I have my old fallen apart paperback. Before we are finished with Tolkien, I'll bring, but I will probably need to rent a pickup truck. I'll bring all my Tolkien books, because I have every edition of The Lord of the Rings. I have all kinds of commentaries, and you might be interested in seeing that. In any event, and this fantasy world is called Middle Earth, which is probably we would have to second guess Professor Tolkien himself, but it probably is called Middle Earth because it's an alternative reality, a reality that is between one kind of reality and other reality, and therefore it's middle. If that has nothing to do with the nomenclature, then I apologize to Tolkien or anyone else. So the three other volumes, and they need to concentrate on that a little bit this time. The three other volumes are all together called The Lord of the Rings. And they consist of the Fellowship of the Ring, the Two Towers, and let me see which is my third one here. Fellowship of the Ring, the Two Towers.
Return of the King.
Excuse me?
Return of the King.
Yes, the Return of the King, the most important. There has also been sort of appended to them an explanatory volume for the aficionados after these were all published, called the Silmarillion, which indicates the mythical background of behind the Lord of the Rings. And when you need to look up a name or an event that you run across in the Lord of the Rings, then that is a good place to look it up. It's very thorough, it's very exact, it's very scientific, although it is, of course, still within the realm of so-called fantasy. It's the mythical structure within and behind the Lord of the Rings that you can somewhat decipher when you read the Silmarillion. Now, there is a great deal of evidence, and if I were so inclined, but I'm not, to present some of that evidence to you, because I have access to the sources. There is a great deal of evidence indicating that from the very beginning of his writing of the Middle-earth material, Tolkien was inspired, that he was subject to what subsequently we often have called altered states of experiences, and that's and all of that occurring, or at least beginning, at a time when he had just come back from the Western Front of World War I, and when he was, let's say, his health was touchy. And this is by no means uncommon. Let's say, unusual experiences, visions, and strange dreams do occur to us, not only when we had a little tab or something, but they can occur to us also when our physical health is touchy, because it seems that other faculties of consciousness can take off and compensate for the physical debilities. I know a little bit about that because, especially for the last, year and a half or 2 years, I have been in kind of old age debility, and I can't say for sure, but I don't think ever in my life did I have so many dreams, and pretty interesting ones, as since that particular time. So we are compensated sometimes, we might say, from a deep psychological angle, we are compensated by the collective unconscious for our physical debility, and often it's not such a bad bargain, So I wouldn't say that all the time, but certainly sometimes not. So this needs to be kept in mind because during, let's say, Tolkien's fantasy life, if you want to call it that, or his extraordinary experiences were, as one might expect, more elaborate and more profound than most other people. And that's, after all, understandable, because he was a great literary figure with a wonderful imagination, with a wonderful style of writing, and it would come to somebody like that. But we need to keep in mind that, which I think I at least once threw this argument into somebody's face, who said, well, but this stuff is not true. And I said, you say it's not true, but it's real. Think about that. And of course, I don't think I had a very approving response to that comment, as one might imagine. But this is true. I mean, factual truth is one thing. And if you want to know, you want to know the price of something important in the nearest grocery store, and if you see the price there, and then that's what they charge you, then you can say, yeah, well, they said the truth. But is it a kind of truth that I would reflect over after I ate the meal? I don't think so. So these things have to be kept in mind, that factual truths have their utility at certain levels of reality. And if we completely say goodbye to them, then the likelihood is that we are going to be recommended to the psychiatrist, because they will say that we have lost touch with so-called reality. So I agree with you that the so-called reality of our world is not a very attractive place. And if you feel like losing touch with it, you have my congratulations. But at the other time, be careful, because the world has, as I just mentioned, other and more pretentious and insulting comments to make about people who withdraw themselves from the reality of the outer world. But on the whole, don't value factual truth above other greater and more profitable truth. So now, that being the case, during this period, especially after he came back from the war and when he was in the military hospitals, Tolkien received by inspirational means, I think, at least 2 full unknown and still unknown languages. And with their own alphabet, with their own grammar, with their own syntax, with everything. And then I think he was on the way of devising a 3rd one, and then I don't think he finished it. But you have to, of course, keep in mind that he was a professional linguist. He was a teacher of languages, both ancient and modern, and truly a very adroit teacher of that sort. But when he told his son, I'm almost certain, because much of this information comes from his son Christopher, who made himself sort of the literary heir of his father, and who then moved to one of the nicer places that one can move to in Europe, to the south of France, to the Languedocian area, and they spent practically this whole time reading over and revising and commenting on his father's works. Christopher is also gone, I think, by now. But in any event, I think he said to Christopher that he would hear audibly the words of the new languages that he was being taught. And so when his son asked him, well, who was teaching it to you? Well, you're asking too much, Christopher. I don't know who, but it was coming, you know. And then he made notes, of course, and he tabulated grammars and all that sort of thing, which also is interesting, because it sort of indicates that there are logical structures of dealing with reality, including the language, which apparently exist in realms other than our own. And so if you wake up in the middle of the night or something of that sort and you hear a strange language, then listen to it a little bit and then ask, look, I don't really know your language, but would you care to teach me? And maybe they will, or whoever will. So in any event, his partaking of unknown and really still unknown languages is also an interesting sort of appendix to the story of his inspirations. Now, let's continue with that. So, one also, I think I mentioned this before, and that's useful to recollect, that even to those who are seasoned and devoted students of mythologies, the mythology of the Lord of the Rings usually impresses them as a completely new mythology, which is not derived from any other. It's not synthetic, it's not a compound of this or that or the other thing, but a completely new and most fascinating mythic tale. Now then, that being the case, we need to go a little further, otherwise we will be here with our smaller audience for a long, long time if we keep on going with Tolkien. So let's say The Lord of the Rings has been characterized and defined by various people, many of them so-called experts, and there just take a little private advice from me: stay away from the experts in whatever field. The experts are dangerous. The experts are to be dealt with and judged very gingerly in whatever field. Now then, that being the case, and that particular little nastiness having been thus exuded, we need to remember that Tolkien introduces an in-between elements that is quite important. Before I come to that, I remember some of the first books, literary criticisms or commentaries of some sort that came out when The Lord of the Rings came out, characterized The Lord of the Rings as being a tale of just nothing else but the struggle of good and evil. Well, I'll try to go into that a little bit, but let me say that that's false. Certainly the struggle between good and evil is present, but that is not the intention or the substance of the book or of the myth itself. It is a particular component, very understandably, because at least in my opinion, it is a component of earthly life. And if we have not recognized that at least on and off, hopefully only on and off in our lives, we have encountered good and evil, then maybe we are not just all that smart. Maybe we just don't see reality the way it is. So it's certainly a very important element. But The Lord of the Rings certainly extends in its scope, in its mission, in its tale, in its poetry, in its beauty, way, way beyond that. Now, why would they have come up with that particular characterization? Well, very simply because the three books of The Lord of the Rings, or at least or the later editions, all have on the frontispiece reproduced a little poem, which is the heart really of The Lord of the Rings. In each one of the books has that same one there, and that is 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dark lords for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, and 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the dark lord on his dark throne, in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie, 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring to them all, and in the darkness bind them, in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. So that is the poetic summary of the entire tale of The Lord of the Rings. And that is why it's called The Lord of the Rings, not The Lord of the Hobbits or The Lord of the Dwarfs or something like that. It's the rings. The rings, and particularly one ring, the great ring, the one ring, are sort of the central the central figure in the entire trilogy. That the rings are more important than the individuals, whether they be elves, whether they be dwarves, whether they be hobbits, whether they be humans. These rings are the truly important thing. So now, what can we say this evening about rings? Somehow the long and to unknown, for even with the Silmarillion, unknown prehistory of Middle-earth indicates that there were, from a very, very long time, probably coming from from Numenor, from the ancient and sunken island, sort of Tolkien's Atlantis, there appeared these rings, and that the rings in turn all had magic powers. But there was one ring which was the most powerful of them all, and which, so to say, commanded them. And that is why the books are called about the Lord of the Rings, because then at a certain point what can he be called? A malign spiritual entity, a demonic personage by the name of Sauron, also referred to especially by his admirers as Sauron the Great. Sauron gets, to use that term, gets wind of this situation with the rings, and he knows that if he got hold of enough those rings, particularly the great ring that rules the rest of them, he would have unlimited domain over Middle-earth. Now, why a bunch of circular pieces of metal, which is after all what a ring is, should have such immense powers? You better ask Tolkien if you can find him. But let us say the issue is that there is, in every historical period and on every continent of the world, there is a search of certain types of humans for something like these magic rings. Why? Because there is a search among humans for domination of the world. Now, I don't blame anyone who has at least theoretically or as a wish fulfillment fantasy in his mind or her mind to have more power in this world. You know, I wouldn't put anybody like that down. Why? Because there are so many irksome, silly, stupid, counterproductive, miserable events in this world that constantly impinge upon us, and if we had even had some control over them, then wouldn't that be just lovely? That would be the loveliest world yet. But of course, it doesn't quite work that way. But if we were given the opportunity to avail ourselves of one or more magic rings that bring power over the environment, then that would undoubtedly be a great and unusual event. Just look what's going on. If you look at the geopolitical level of the world, people want to have dominion, people want to have rulership, people want to have power as much as possible. And if you look at various other fields, then in their own way the same thing is true. When one has thought about those things and studied the philosophers and so forth, then one comes to the conclusion why? Why do people desire power of various kinds? Why aren't they just happy with the amount of power that has been allocated to them, or that may come to them in some orderly and legitimate fashion? But why there's more and more? And of course, since the Industrial Revolution mainly, power came to be equated with money. Money is power. And this has moved a lot of people, and still does, and I understand that too, moved them into activities which would enrich them with material goods. And there were times in history when the material goods consisted on owning a lot of animals. Much of the Bible will show you that, because it talks about even the very word pecuniary comes from that, because pecunia in Latin means cattle. So people who had a lot of cattle, they were rich. So, and various other things. Maybe there was an earlier period when people had to have large flocks of poultry. And then that constituted their riches. I don't envy them for all the rooster calls that they have to hear, because at various times in my life, due to circumstances, I was subjected to it, and it's still dark outside, the moon is down, there is no sun up, nothing, and there goes the call of the rooster. No more sleeping, It's really a very annoying situation. I like those roosters much better in a cooking pot than outside my window. But in any event, riches is power. Power is riches. Then, of course, there is political power, and people knock themselves out and spend billions and billions on elections in order to have that kind of power. And sometimes the more money they spend on it and the more noise they make, the more I wish that they wouldn't get elected. Because it's usually those who strive for power in the most strident way are the ones that shouldn't have it. But on the other hand, the way things are organized in this world, they usually do get it. So keep that in mind. An election is not the award of the award of medals of good behavior for nice politicians. One wishes, but that's not the case. So how I got onto that, I don't know. It's probably the calendar and different important events that are taking place at this time. But let us say here, so therefore, if even in a fantasy world of Middle Earth, we would get hold of a reality of certain magical objects, in this case of the great rings, with the chief ring, the great ring of power, which governs all the rest of them, then certainly we would try to utilize some of those to our advantage, or to the advantage of our nation, our communities, and so forth. So what we have here is that there are magical objects. In this case, the rings, and these rings are desired by many, but they come, like all the magical, beautiful things in the Lord of the Rings, they came from the magic isles across the sea, from the sunken city of Numenor, which I mentioned, which is like the Atlantis and of various people, and that therefore also people came over at various prehistoric periods of the tale, and these people knew that power could be had in this new Middle Earth, so-called Middle Earth. And therefore they and their brother magicians devised these rings whereby power on earth can be gained, and not even by nefarious means, but which would give an important status of power and wealth and importance to those people who had them. Now, that being the case, so we already know something about why the Lord of the Rings is called the Lord of the Rings, but we still don't know who is the Lord of the Rings. It's in the singular, and Tolkien would not be guilty with such bad language. So then we find out that once again in the immortal lands and the many islands of the Atlantis-like structures out in the ocean, there came a being, a supernatural being, not the only one of its kind, because when you look carefully and if you know how to make comparisons, you see that there is a very Gnostic cosmological scheme that Tolkien devised. And in this cosmological scheme there are successive aeons coming from the eternal, and in some of these aeons there are beings that govern those aeons and who then can also do various other things. And among these aeonial beings, non-human, but we must say both physical and spiritual, there was one who, let's say, succumbed to the temptation of seeking for personal power, which the other aeonial beings didn't. You might also be interested, or if you are reminded now, that there is also a very important and very beautiful feminine power that Tolkien placed into these Aeonian regions, and that is Our Lady Elbereth, as he calls it, which is really Tolkien's Virgin Mary or Tolkien's Sophia, and the elves of whom she is the queen. The elves remember her, even those elves that find themselves in Middle-earth are separated from their original home and are on the whole not terribly happy, the poor dears, but even they, whenever possible, call out with their songs and their music to Elbereth. I'm not a singer, and I haven't really done this sort of thing, but then after all, I'm almost 93 years old. If by that age I'm not permitted unusual and stupid things, well, then I never will be, and probably never will be. But let's say, I don't know, the elves have these particular hymns, just like, you must remember, if that is of any import, I'm not so sure, that Tolkien was a very devout Catholic, who most days of his life from childhood on went to church and served as an altar boy, the Holy Mass, and who was raised more or less when he became an orphan by Catholic priests. So you can see that the Marianic archetype sort of comes forth there. And so one of the first times that you encounter a tribe of the elves who are here on Middle-earth and wandering around, when a band of hobbits is marching in the countryside, there they are sitting on the trees singing the hymn to Elbereth. And Tolkien actually set that song to music. And at one time I had that music on a recording. But of course I lent it to some dishonest individual who never gave it back. And I don't know whether it could be had now, but it's from there I still remember the melody a little bit, and I can also have your testimony that I wasn't made out to be a singer. Elberet Giltoniel, si livren penna miriel, o mene laglar elenat, mikairet palandiriel, fanuilos lerlinaton, nefair si nefairon. This is how the elves, separated from their mother Elbereth, who is still in the heavens, call out to her and remind her that they are here and that they do belong to her and that they want to be close to her. And many times, once I learned that when it was already becoming a little bit dicey walking around in Hollywood, not up here but further on down. And then when I wanted to sort of get some strength for myself in case I encounter something unsavory, this is what I would sing on Franklin Avenue, on Wilcox Avenue, and fortunately I still remembered it. And I think the English translation of it, this is in Elfic, the land of the high elves. So in any event, let's see what has happened then. Now I called attention to two circumstances which are crucial, but which are not really related to each other. One being that there came a not very savory being from the higher realm, and that was Sauron the Great. Now, Sauron wasn't the only nasty spirit in the aeons. His teacher and initiator was an even greater archonic spirit, and I just had his name, and now it probably escaped me. No, he was Morgoth. Morgoth was the initiator and the teacher of Sauron, but they are both very reprehensible characters. And then Sauron, on the other hand, got tired, I think, in the eternal realm, and he went to Middle-earth. And he thought, well, this would be a good place for him to rule, and he went there. But he also found out that others have gotten ahead of him there, and that he couldn't really easily become the ruler of Middle-earth. And there was a human kingdom, in fact two kingdoms initially, the North Kingdom and the South Kingdom, where the humans ruled, and who were also of the ancient Numenorian race. Their ancestors also have come over the sea. There's a little bit of an England about it, just like all these different peoples who, and different historical periods came to England, Celts and Saxons and Vikings and ultimately Norman French and others. The people have been coming to Middle-earth. Now, as to where they precisely came from, don't ask me, because remember, this is not a book of facts, but this is a book of myths. But so there are various strange creatures around there. But among them also there arrived Sauron, who is a great being with huge magical and spiritual powers, but also an equally great desire to rule Middle-earth, which appears to him like a good place that he could rule. That's what usually happens. That's what happened to another person of that sort who had a kind of a little mustache, and a bushy hairdo, and his first name was Adolf, and then another one who had a great big mustache and who was smoking a pipe, and whose name was Josip Vissarionovich Stalin. Even the word is awesome and loathsome. But let's say, or Pol Pot. What kind of a pot was Pol Pot? Well, he went to pot, I don't know. In any event, these sorts of beings are around. And so all kinds of things. There were even at some point, I mentioned them before, there were the 7 wizards who also came from one of the other worlds. And for a while they pretty much ran the show in Middle-earth because they could do all kinds of miraculous things. But by the time we get into the story with the Lord of the Rings, they have greatly diminished. And there is Saruman, and they all have their colors, because that's the colored robe that they wear, and they are named by that. Saruman, who is the head of the council of the Magi, so to say, initially. Saruman is referred to as Saruman the White, and he's the most important of the wizards to begin with, although things change. But the one that the book is mostly concerned with is Gandalf the Grey, and also equally very important and very powerful wizard, who, however, initially in the book is subordinate to Saruman. Then there is a sort of the buffoon of the Magi, is Radagast the Brown, who is a magus. He is a wizard of birds. And he charms the birds in the forest and takes them to different places and so forth. And those are pretty much all, unless I forgot somebody, those are pretty much all the wizards that are still kicking up their heels in Middle-earth by that time. But so you have kind of almost like missionary representatives of the various great races of beings that are in Middle-earth, but that's not, they also have their home somewhere else. And so these are the wizards. And then there are still real, honest-to-goodness, undeniable elves, of course, on Earth. We mentioned them before. They have sort of their own territory mapped out for them, and they have also great magical powers, and try to look out for Middle-earth with their own powers as much as they can, and they have a king and a queen. Tolkien is a very good monarchist with all of the various groups that he brings in. There is always a king, or there is a king in exile. There is a king who is to return, which is really true with the humans, because they came from Numenor for the Numenorian kings, but as time went on, century after century, the royal families died out, and the 2 kingdoms came to an end for lack of members of a royal family. But of course, that's not how it's in the course of the story. It is discovered. I don't know how much. In the course of the story, it is discovered that there is danger, that an evil spiritual being has come and is occupying one after the other different localities, different different places, different castles, and that this evil entity is not just come as a visitor, but he has come to take over. And this is not a good thing, or a good king. And so then the various notables, the leaders of the elves, the leaders of the humans, the leaders of the dwarves, of everybody else come together and say, well, what can we do about the coming and the increasing encroachment of this terrible being, because they know Sauron to be a very bad person. And so there are various plans are being made, and in the midst of all of this, as this so often happens, a seeming accident occurs that becomes the solution of the conundrum, the help that they required. And that is that the other little creature that is a sort of a branch race of the hobbits that are called the Stoors. They live mostly in or around waters, and this little swimming creature in the water discovers something that he has never seen before. A big, shining, beautiful, mysterious ring. And it turns out that this is the supreme ring, the ring of power, which has command over the other minor rings who are around, and which is really a tremendously powerful and important magical object. Well, the ring, the magic ring, which now this little no-account creature gained possession of, sort of begins to eat up his mind. First he murders his cousin, who was the first one who found the ring, and then Gollum, as this one is called, has taken it away from his cousin, and when the cousin didn't want to let go of it, he throttled him, which is his favorite mode of dealing with inconvenient people. So now he has the ring, but he also feels guilty and miserable and all that. Then he takes off from his own little tribe and goes into the mountains where there are big caves and lakes and things of that sort, and hides out there with his ring, so that whenever somebody comes along who might be inconvenient to him, he just, I forgot the most important thing. No, maybe not most important, but a very important thing. In addition to its tremendous magical powers, the ring, the one ring, the chief ring of them all, when it is put on, renders the individual who put it on invisible. When he takes it off, then he's visible again. So our murderous little friend Gollum now can do all kinds of things, because whenever he wants to catch a fish or do something else that he's probably not allowed to do, then he just puts on the ring and there he goes. He defends himself that way and he attacks others that way. So anyway, he's up there, hidden away. Now, not to drag things out forever, because, as I see, we may have a couple of more meetings in November, but I am not really here to tell you the whole tale, but just up to this point. So what happens then subsequently as the result of various other apparent coincidences and mishaps and accidents and things of that sort, that one of the younger hobbits, the nephew of the old hobbit Bilbo, and the younger one being Frodo, has found himself in the mountains, and where these where Gollum, the thief of the ring, hides with the ring. So now a new development occurs because accidentally, if there are any accidents, the great ring, which had been dropped by the thief, the murdering thief who had it, he dropped it in the water. But when Frodo came there and was swimming around there, I think also looking for fish, the ring slipped on his finger, which in itself is a magical situation. There was a time when I wore a lot of rings, and now they're all in, with the exception of this one, all in my drawer. But let us say, at least the rings that I knew hardly ever slipped on their own volition on my finger. So it's unusual. But anyway, now and he sees, so Frodo sees now that nobody can see him. The animals cannot see him. The murderous thief Gollum cannot see him. Nobody can see him. And there are already some orcs that I have to say something about, a very detestable and disgusting race, which probably has been bred over a period of time by the magicians. Maybe Sauron himself had a hand in it, and other magicians also. They're ugly and nasty and stupid and obtuse and everything that you can say about them. Maybe that was construed by the good idiots in Oxford also as a statement of racism. Well, come on, your lordships. You know what? This world always had stupid people. This world always had bad people. This world always had unbearable people. And that's the way it is. And moreover, you know what? You are stupid, you are unbearable, and you belong into the same category, so get out of my sight. These are my fantasies of how I speak to the red-robed Oxford dons who participated in this particular stupidity. In any event, now on the ground in this strange place, there occurs the prolonged encounter of Frodo the Hobbit, who is of the second generation already, because Bilbo is the old Hobbit who started all of this, but he's there, and he by accident comes by the ring, and with all kinds of chicaneries, including he tempts the murderous little creature to have a game of riddles with him. And since this is a lonely little murderer out there in the hills, he's quite pleased with having to play a game of riddles. But in the course of these riddles, it sort of begins to dawn on the murderous creature that this fellow who is there asking the riddles, he apparently knows something, and that he perhaps suspects that he had the ring, although he doesn't have it at that time. So in any event, all kinds of commotions, but eventually Frodo the Hobbit manages to get out of the cave, to escape with the magic ring, and the murderous creatures is now bereft the ring and is terribly, terribly unhappy. So what do we have here? First of all, I think one thing that we need to keep in mind is that built into the story are innumerable incidents and instances of magical, mystical events. And among them is the fact that the ring itself being a powerful magical object, the ring itself has its own desire. The ring doesn't want to stay on the ground with Gollum forever. The ring wants to get into better company and maybe help out some of the good people. And therefore, the ring disguises itself and remains on Frodo's finger, who then goes away, and then a whole other, let's say, other portion of the Lord of the Rings starts, because now, as time develops, we need to keep in mind that being in possession of the magic ring has really rendered Frodo himself a kind of little wise magical character. He is not a wizard like Gandalf the Grey, but he is a little magical character. And in his magical persona, he begins to discover that this ring apparently is far more important, far more powerful than he thought, and that therefore he would have to go and find people who know about the ring and who would help him discover what it can do and probably put it to good use. And so eventually he finds himself back with Gandalf the Grey, and Gandalf discovers that he has the ring, and so a whole new mythos develops as to how the good and wise and productive and kindly people of Middle-earth, including the elves, the dwarves, the hobbits, and those humans who are of a good disposition get together, and how they could utilize the one ring, the magic ring, for helping the world. And the helping of the world means that already Sauron, the great black magician, the one who really came from another world, sort of a great demonic presence, is looking for that ring, because he knows that if he got hold of it, then he would be the most powerful being on earth. But it takes him quite a while to be able to come close to it. So at the same time, what you have now you see the beginning of the two great antagonists. The people of Middle-earth with their more outstanding members, the wizards, the hobbits, those few humans who are still there, and so forth on their side, and Sauron, the Dark Lord, who has already acquired his final habitat, the Dark Tower, Barad-dûr as it is often called, and you can see that these two are coming up against each other, and that and then one of the literary critics or somebody like that wrote that the war of which now develops, the War of the Rings, this is really commanded and fought by Gandalf the Wizard. So Gandalf the Grey, the Wizard, is the magical brains of the people and various inhabitants of Middle-earth who need defending. And now he goes around to the various, confers with the various races of Middle-earth as to how they could defend themselves against the Dark Lord. So now what you have is, I would say, but that of course is purely a conjecture of my own, I would say that at that point you really have Middle-earth turn into our world. And that we we, the various races of beings are there, and then when we look up on the dark mountain by the volcano of Ordrin, there is the Dark Lord. That there is a dark presence, a very powerful and very power-hungry presence that is by no means disinclined to come and eat us all up. I don't mean necessarily with teeth, because it's not Dracula. Dracula was a much nicer guy than Sauron. And so they all then gradually, under Gandalf's inspiration, band together, and then the great war develops between the various peoples of Middle-earth, and on the one side, and of Sauron the Great on the other. Now Sauron built a dark tower, a dark castle for himself in a distant region, which is itself, the whole region is kind of off-putting, but he has also, with the help of maybe of Saruman, another wizard, but in any event he bred some awesome and very malign creatures, and I mentioned them for a minute before, the orcs. Now, where the orcs really come from is not clear, but they are an exceedingly nasty sort of semi-demoniac, semi-human race, and as such, they are under the command of the Dark Lord. And whenever he makes warfare, as he does eventually in the book The Two Towers, I might as well throw that in while we're finishing. The Two Towers, which is the second volume, is the Two Towers are the Dark Tower of Mordor, where the Dark Lord dwells, and the White Tower of Minas Tirith, which is still occupied by humans who descend from the ancient Númenóreans, but they no longer have a king because the royal family died out. But they are visited by Gandalf the wizard and advised by good people. So these remain the two bridgeheads, you might mean. The bridgehead of evil and the bridgehead of good. Now, I had an idea, but this is why we have to continue with the series. I wanted to do a little more of a Gnostic theoretical disquisition of where evil comes from and how, let's say, Tolkien's concept of evil and the war against evil can be interpreted in Gnostic ways. And I have some ideas that I at least consider to be good ideas. Now, whether anybody else does, I don't know. But if we get together again on this topic, I intend to share with you that, and then we go on. Because what we need to keep in mind, and I said that before, that I am not a bad storyteller. I can tell the story, but certainly Tolkien told it much better and much longer. And so what I am trying to do is discern for our own uses in the present world a meaning. The important thing is meaning. And if we get, and the meaning is always personal, what does this mean to me? So if we can distill and discern within the vast saga of the Lord of the Rings a meaning that is meaningful for us as people, meaningful for us as a culture, and maybe as a world, then Professor Tolkien has not lived in vain, and he has not exerted the tremendous amount of inspired writing that he did, because there is meaning there and there is inspiration there, but as so often it has to be discovered. It's that way in everything in life. Pick up pick up some, there were certainly times I picked up some inconspicuous book, didn't look like anything much. And I was probably riding the bus, so I said, oh gosh, I got to read something. So I pulled it out and read it. By the time the bus came to its end station, I couldn't put the book down because I found meaning in it. And this can be, anything worthwhile can be and should be a conveyor of meaning. Because if there is anything that is going to further continue the salvation, the blessing, the turning to grace of this strange world, it will be meaning proceeding from higher sources. Meaning from higher sources will save this world, it will save us. If we don't discover such meaning, then let us say our future, I wouldn't say is totally dire, but our future looks much darker. But the light of life is meaning. This is not the kind of meaning where this means that. So to try to interpret, let's say, Tolkien by, Gandalf stands for, for Winston Churchill or something of that sort. And those are one-to-one analogies which don't convey meaning. Meaning is at the deeper level. There might be an analogy, but then there must be, when the analogy goes into a myth, then in the myth you can find the salvific, the enlightening, the blessing meaning. And I do think very, very strongly that Tolkien has created something of this sort, and that therefore the great Tolkienian myth of the Lord of the Rings should not, I'm trying to transcribe, I think, Lincoln's Gettysburg speech, that the Tolkienian myth will not perish, but will bring meaning to our lives, both here in America and everywhere else. Because without meaning, we are absolutely consigned to very dark and terrible things. With meaning, everything changes. There is light, there is understanding, there is wisdom, there is kindness. May indeed that day come soon. Thank you so much.